Father, thank you for the worship, Lord, for preparing our hearts just to draw close to you, Lord. I pray, Father, that you would now do a work through your word, Lord, that you would just teach us, that you would speak to us, Father, that you would do your work in us, Father. You say that your word's not going to go out void. And so, Lord, tonight as we get into it, Lord, we pray that you would help it to do a special work in our hearts, not our neighbors, not someone else's, but in us, Father. Lord, I do pray for your Spirit to come and to anoint the message, to give me the words, Father, and to direct my steps as we go through this study, Lord. So I just pray, Lord, that you'd set it ablaze tonight in our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen. So book 2, chapter 1. So I do have a slide to show you, but even though we're getting into another book, in the Hebrew Bible, in the beginning, this is all one book, and so it's broken apart so that it'd be easier to find for us, but you have the law, which is the first 5 books, then you have the prophets, and this is going to be Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings all together. And then you have the latter prophets. And then you have the writings. And that's going to make up the book of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, the way they have it. And so they don't have Samuel broken apart into 2 books. They just have it as the book of Samuel. So as we get into the second book, it's actually just a continuation. It's just the same thing we've been going through, but broken apart for us. So 2 Samuel, it's written by 3 authors. As you realize in the first book, Samuel dies, and he's not going to be writing what happened after he passed away. So what's believed is that there's 3 authors, and they have if you look at 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 29, it says, "Now the acts of King David, first and last, indeed they are written in the book of Samuel the seer, in the book of Nathan the prophet, and in the book of Gad the seer." So it's possible it could have been Samuel, Nathan, and Gad at one point in time, but it's simply called the book of Samuel. And they believe that these other 2 guys helped to write it. So Samuel would have written the first part, the beginning, that spoke about himself and the parts where he was used to anoint the kings. And then you would have Nathan and Gad completing it for us. Now, we're going to be continuing tonight in the book and learning about David. But if you think, we're in a new book in the Bible, it's just a continuation of 1 Samuel, and you're excited to be learning about David and how this man goes from being giant killer and running for his life. If all you had was 1 Samuel, you'd be very disappointed by now because we're done with that book. But it's just a continuation. You would have lots of questions. Is he going to be the next king? Now, in 1 Samuel, what we have seen so far is we've seen the last of the prophets. Samuel was the last, and he had died, but not before anointing the beginning of the kings. So Samuel dies, but he's anointed Saul, and Saul has been king, and now he's passed away in the book of 1 Samuel, and David has been running for his life, but we saw the beginning of Samuel, we saw the beginning of Saul, we saw the end of Samuel, and we saw the end of Saul's reign as well. Saul had started out as a good king, but he finished poorly. Last week, we also saw a very detailed description of Saul's death. So we saw just how he spent his last moments. We've seen a lot about David as well. He just hasn't been the king. He's been anointed. He's been around the king, Saul, but he's also been running for his life. He spent a little while away. You could call this time that he's been in 1 Samuel his pre-king days. That time spent learning how to be a king or learning how to lead his men, because he does have people that are following him. A lot of it's spent running from Saul, but he's also been growing in leading and trusting in God. Now, Saul has persecuted David to the point that he fears for his life. He flees to the enemy land of the Philistines. He's been there for about a year and 4 months in the Philistine territory, and they even gave him a place of his own, Ziklag. And so Ziklag was given to David, and it's been theirs for ever since. But so is the land the Philistines were occupying. So last week when we were looking at this, we saw that David, or I reminded you that David had come back from the fight, right? He just returned home from rescuing his family from the Amalekites. He can finally rest from battle. And at the same time, up north in Israel, they're fleeing before the Philistines. They have no leadership now. David is the man God had been preparing to lead, and God is about to place him over all Israel. But what we have in 2 Samuel and how that takes place is what we're going to be getting into. So you may be wondering, what kind of king would David be at this point? Is he going to just ride in and become the next king, saying, "Look, here I am"? The people know David to be a great military man. They saw him coming in. They saw him go out. He's killed his 10,000s, remember? But is he a king? He's a military man. But is he a king? And do the people even know that he has already been anointed to be the king? Because Saul's dead. The Ishbosheth is the remaining son of Saul at this point. And so if you wanted a king like the other nations, what you would be doing is looking for one of his descendants to step up and become the next king. So David wouldn't even be in line, except for God has him in line. And I believe they do know that David is to be the next king. Word has traveled fast. And maybe if you remember Abigail, when David came, she said in 1 Samuel 25, verse 30 through 31, it says, when the Lord, she's speaking to him, stopping him from attacking her husband and killing him, when the Lord has done all he's promised and has made you leader of Israel, don't let this issue with Nabal be a spot on your record, she says. Then your conscience won't have to bear the staggering burden of needless bloodshed and vengeance. And when the Lord has done these great things for you, please remember me, your servant. So the people know. They know about this anointing part that happened with Jesse and his sons. And they know what God's done with David, but we still have so many questions. As we get into the 2 Samuel, I hope to be able to answer some of those before I have help to do that. So we're going to get into 2 Samuel chapter 1. It says, now it came to pass, after the death of Saul, when David had returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, and David had stayed 2 days in Ziklag, on the third day, behold, it happened that a man came from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and dust on his head. You see, it's only been 2 days. It was a couple chapters, 2 weeks for us, but only 2 days for David since he's returned, and he's finally found a little bit of rest in Ziklag. His town's still destroyed by the Amalekites and burned. And if you remember, David chased these Amalekites who had a 3-day head start on him. Then he had to return with all the animals and everything else. And it's only been 2 days so far when an Amalekite comes walking into town. Now, they might have recognized him. I don't know what an Amalekite looks like, but maybe they recognized him as Amalekite. But we don't know that so far. It's just a man walking into town. But word has traveled fast. I think this man must have been with the Philistines in Aphek when David showed up with his men to help fight, because he knows right where David is at and how to reach him with this news. Something I find interesting is that David didn't leave someone to bring word to him about this battle that was going to take place. He rode halfway up there. You would think he would have left one of his guys to send word, because there's no other way to get a message. So this man walks into town with his clothes torn, dust on his head. And right away we know something is up with this guy, and it doesn't look good. These are signs of mourning. He's showing his grief over the death of someone. And it says, so it was when he came to David that he fell to the ground and he prostrated himself. And David said to him, where have you come from? So he said to him, I have escaped from the camp of Israel. I had to look up what that prostrate was. I didn't know if it was flat on your face or bowing with your knees bent and your head on the ground. It's like, is there a difference between prostrating yourself? It's not a word I use very often. I know he's bowing somehow, but I didn't know if it was flat on his stomach, and I didn't learn anything. It's either or. But this man, he's come from fighting against Israel with the Philistines. And when he sees David, he falls on the ground in front of him in submission. That's what he's doing. This guy has firsthand information. He was in the battle, and I'm sure everyone was eager to hear what he had to say. It says, then David said to him, how did the matter go? Please tell me. And he answered, the people have fled from the battle. Many of the people are fallen and dead, and Saul and Jonathan, his son, are dead also. Right away, wow, this is not the news you want to hear. What a mix of emotions you would have to have. Why is this man even here? Is he just trying to gloat over what happened to Israel? For some reason, this message came very quickly to David. This man must have come straight from the battlefield, and I wonder if God wasn't behind this, if he actually sent this man to tell David about the news. The message is horrible. David's king is dead. His best friend is dead. All of the troops he once commanded could have been dead. All the people he was close to are gone. And the people of Israel, his family, are in danger. When things like this happen, often people ask, why? Why did this happen? And in this case, we already have been told why. I found it interesting. I was looking through Chronicles, and it's almost word for word this chapter in 1 Chronicles 10:13 through 14. It says, so Saul died for his unfaithfulness, which he had committed against the Lord, because he did not keep the word of the Lord, and also because he consulted a medium for guidance, but he did not inquire of the Lord. Therefore he killed him and turned the kingdom over to David, the son of Jesse. In 1 Chronicles, you see that even though we were told, I think it was in 28, that he sought the Lord, but the Lord didn't answer him by dreams or by and Thummim, and he goes to the Thurman, whatever, Paul. Anyways, he goes to the witch to find out. But here in Chronicles, it says, but he did not inquire of the Lord. Because of his sin, because of his unfaithfulness, God killed him, and his sin has affected all Israel. The people are fleeing for their lives, and this means they're not hanging around taking their time packing. They're grabbing what they can get, and they're running for their lives. So David said to the young man who told him, how do you know that Saul and Jonathan, his son, are dead? How can I believe you? How can I trust you? Then the young man who told him said, as I happened by chance to be on Mount Gilboa, there was Saul leaning on his staff, his spear. And indeed the chariots and horsemen followed hard after him. Now when he looked behind him, he saw me, and he called me, and I answered, here I am. And he said to me, who are you? So I answered him, I'm an Amalekite. He said to me again, please stand over me and kill me, for anguish has come upon me, but my life still remains in me. Now, this is a little bit of a different story than what we read in chapter 31 of 1 Samuel. It is the same information we have about the death of Saul, but with a little twist. The last we heard was Saul fell on his own sword and he died, and then his armor bearer did the same. It seems like, according to this guy, Saul is fatally wounded by arrows. He now has a sword sticking out his back, but this guy says he still wasn't dead. And just causes you to go, how many chances does the Lord give him to cry out to God? He can't even kill himself. If you remember, Saul was afraid the Philistines would violate him before he died, torture him somehow. This man is an Amalekite, so Saul asked for this man to finish him off. At this point, all Saul is concerned about is himself, begging for death, but still not crying out to the Lord. says in verse 10, "So I stood over him, and I killed him, because I was sure that he could not live after he had fallen. And I took the crown that was on his head and the bracelet that was on his arm, and have brought them here to my Lord." This is a crazy story for David to be hearing. And he still may have had questions in his mind about whether this man is telling the truth. But then comes a real kicker. He shows him the crown and the bracelet that belonged to Saul. This is undeniable proof that they're dead. We live in a world where we are insulated from death. We don't see many things taking their last breath. We open a package to get our meat instead of raising it and processing it ourselves. And the finality of death is something we may have seen, but we're insulated from it. David lived during a time where death was a part of everyday life. As a boy, he killed the lion, the bear. I'm sure as a shepherd, he was part of the death of many of his lambs. He killed Goliath and many others as a young man, and he has just recently killed Amalekites for almost 24 hours straight. Death is permanent, and I think that perhaps we're so insulated that those consequences don't cause us to change the way we live like it should. Sin has a high price, and the consequence of sin is death. Death is disturbing. It's painful. No one wants to have to deal with it, but every single one of us will have to do that. Sin, like death, is disturbing. It's painful. Death, you have no control over, but sin, you do. There's a way of escape for every one of us. Jesus Christ has shown us that way of escape, and that is by believing in him. See, Saul has died. There's no more chances for him. And a lot of the people of Israel who died that day, there's no more chances left for them. But if you're hearing this message tonight, there's still hope. Jesus Christ has provided that way. He's shown us the way. See, this is horrible news. Therefore, David took hold of his own clothes, and he tore them, and so did all the men who were with him. And they mourned, and they wept and fasted until evening for Saul and for Jonathan his son, for the people of the Lord and for the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. Remember, David is still in the enemy's territory. And if this Amalekite or even the Philistines were looking to find out where David stood, I think they would now know. David was just hiding in the enemy camp. He never wanted to fight against his own people. We saw David even supporting his own people, the Jews, with the spoils he collected from the enemies, even the spoils he collected from these Amalekites. He has always been for Israel. And the way David and his men respond when they heard the news was in mourning. They showed emotion. These were men's men. These are some of David's mightiest men mourning over the death of Saul and Jonathan. Now, Proverbs 24:17 says, "Do not rejoice when your enemy falls, and do not let your heart be glad when he stumbles." And these guys were not rejoicing. The Amalekite could have thought this would have been a time for celebration, but all David's men knew how he felt about someone killing Saul. David instead had this Amalekite arrested, and they fasted and they cried until evening. Verse 13 said, "Then David said to the young man who told him, 'Where are you from?' And he answered, 'I am the son of an alien, an Amalekite.'" He's an Amalekite, one of the very people Saul was supposed to completely destroy. God told Saul he was going to be removed from being king because he did not obey the word of the Lord when it came to the Amalekites. And this man claims to have been the one who finally finished off Saul. And if this is true, then it would seem that Saul's sin had finally killed him. The Amalekites had always fought against and been a thorn in the side of Israel. David and his army just got done fighting with the Amalekites, I said. But both of these battles would not have happened if Saul had wiped out the Amalekites completely, destroying even their animals. That was the judgment God placed on them for what they had done to Israel, complete annihilation. But had Saul obeyed the Lord, then even Saul wouldn't be dead at this moment. because Saul wouldn't have been trying to remove him. God doesn't rejoice in the death of the wicked. He's not rejoicing in the death of these Amalekites. There is no one who goes to hell that God does not love, even these Amalekites. But that is the judgment God placed on them. Saul never followed through on what God wanted him to do. And to this day, the Jews during the Purim festival read the book of Esther. And if you remember Haman, he was an Agagite. And Saul had kept King Agag, the Amalekite, alive. So they believe he was an Amalekite. Samuel later on killed him, but his descendants lived on. And wicked Haman tried to do the very same thing to the Jews and have them exterminated. So when they read the book of Esther, every time Haman's name is read, the kids are encouraged to boo and to desecrate his name, to shame his name, make noises, and interrupt that part of the book. And so I guess as a kid, that would be a great point. You're paying attention. You're waiting for that name, because as soon as that name comes up, you get to boo. Deuteronomy 25:17, verse 17 and 19 says, "Remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you were coming out of Egypt, how he met you on the way and attacked your rear ranks, all the stragglers at your rear, when you were tired and weary and he did not fear God. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord your God has given you rest from your enemies all around in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess as an inheritance, that you will blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. You shall not forget." And that's what Saul was supposed to do. And many more people will die by the hands of the Amalekites because of his sin. Now I have a map here. And this man who has just come down and admitted to killing the king, it makes you, wonder why. Because if you look at where he comes from, David's down here in Ziklag, right? And Aphek is where he had gone to meet up with the Philistine army so that he could go to battle with them. I'm going to be right there for you, king. And the king said, "I'm going to make you my bodyguard for life." And so David was there. And then all the other nobles said, "He can't go to battle with us." And they took off and went up to Shunem. Well, David takes off and goes down to Ziklag and chases the Amalekites. Well, up here on the Mount Gilboa, across this valley is where they fought, the valley of Jezreel. And they lost. And they started backpedaling. They started retreating. And they chased him up the mountain and they killed him up here. And so this is where that guy comes from. So Aphek is where the Philistine army had met, Shunem, all these places. But it is 67 miles north to Shunem from Aphek, and 50 plus miles from Aphek down to Ziklag. So this man just came 117 miles, around 3 to 4 days' walk, to tell David that Saul was dead and to show him the crown and the bracelet that were Saul's. He's got a purpose in mind. He's traveling to tell him something, and why he would do that, he hasn't told us yet. My thought is that this man believes David had become the enemy of Saul and the Israelites, and that this would have been good news to David and his men. And there's a verse that says that. But he's not rushing to David because he wants to share the good news. Some people believe this guy is a scavenger, picking through the dead bodies, taking things of value. And the reason he did rush upon the crown and then run down to David is that he was hoping David would give him a reward for the news. It wasn't that he wanted to share the news that Saul was dead, but that he wanted a reward. Verse 14 says, "So David said to him, 'How was it you were not afraid to put forth your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?'" How come you weren't afraid? See, this is how David lived his life. He would never put forth his hand and strike the Lord's anointed. He wouldn't let his men. There's a fear that David has when it comes to God. Like we shared last week, the one God has anointed has been set apart for a special purpose. God chose Saul, son of Kish, and anointed him. He gave him his spirit, and Saul prophesied. He went before Saul into battle. Mighty miracles were done for Saul and the armies of Israel. So if God has set a person aside for a special job like king, who is David to say your time is up now? My turn. See, David asked this man, were you not afraid? How do you know God is done with that person? This should be just as scary for us because God is still raising up leaders and he is still removing them. Romans 13:1-2 says, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. If God has placed these leaders in the positions they have, then he has also placed us under them. You may not like the man God has placed in that position, but realize you too go against God when you go against his anointed. So why did David consider it such a big deal to strike the Lord's anointed? Even someone like Saul, who had made himself David's enemy? See, David knew that God anointed Saul and only God could remove him from office. It was God's job, not David's, to remove Saul and make David king. It is God's job, and our job is to pray for our leaders. Pray that God would raise up godly leaders. Verse 15, it says, then David called one of the young men and said, go near and execute him. And so he struck him and he died. See, David had this man killed just for touching the Lord's anointed. And what happens if he becomes king and people just start going around killing him, killing the next king, killing the next king? There's no sacred office. God's the one who created that position. God's the one who fills that position. 2 Samuel 4:10 says, when someone told me, saying, look, Saul is dead, thinking to have brought good news, I arrested him, and I had him executed in Ziklag, the one who thought I would give him a reward for this news. See, in chapter 4 is talking about this same guy right here. So apparently David did have him arrested. Doesn't say it in this chapter, but it does in chapter 4. And it also says that this guy came thinking he had good news, even though he's wearing dust and has ripped clothes. And he came looking for a reward. David had his reasons to be angry with Saul, and so did his men. But David would not allow anyone to touch Saul. 1 Samuel 22:2 says, and everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, everyone who was discontented gathered to him. He became a captain over them, and there were about 400 men at that time. See, the men who came were the ones that were not very happy. And a lot of the debt, the taxes, and the other things could have been due to Saul. So they weren't fond of Saul either, but they all mourned the death of Israel's king and followed David's example. Now, whether this man killed Saul or not, he declared to be, the murderer, hoping to gain something from David for it. I don't know. See, in the end, whether he actually did or not, it cost him his life. So David said to him, your blood is on your own head, for your own mouth has testified against you, saying, I have killed the Lord's anointed. It doesn't matter whether you believe this guy did or did not kill Saul. I don't even know if David knew. But he basically says to the Amalekite, I don't know if you killed Saul or not, but your words have testified against you. You have sentenced yourself to death. See, this guy's story was, I killed Saul, who was almost dead anyways, right? But what David heard was, I have killed the Lord's anointed. Then David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan his son. And he told them to teach the children of Judah the song of the bow. Indeed, it is written in the book of Jasher. So David lamented, which means to chant or wail. It also means to strike a note, like on a musical instrument. Basically, David expressed his grief in a song. Now we know David as a man of war, but he is also a talented musician. He was brought in to play the harp for Saul, if you remember. David also wrote songs and poems. A lot of the psalms we have in the Bible were written by David. So he writes this song, especially for Saul and Jonathan. Now, I've seen a lot of people struggle with just how to say goodbye to a family member or someone they cared about. I've seen them ask someone else to speak. something they wrote because they would not be able to do it without crying. I have seen people sing songs. I have even seen them write poetry. See, people deal with death in lots of different ways. David, in this situation, wrote this song and had the people of Judah teach it to their kids so they wouldn't forget these two amazing leaders of Israel. It says in verse 19, "The beauty of Israel is slain on your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath. Proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon." Now these were Philistine cities. He says, don't tell it there, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice. Let the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. O mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew nor rain upon you, nor fields of offerings, for the shield of the mighty is cast away there, the shield of Saul not anointed with oil. See, David curses this mountain because of Saul and Jonathan, that they died there. He goes on and he says, "From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, and the sword of Saul did not return empty." Saul and Jonathan were beloved and pleasant in their lives, and in their death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet with luxury, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. David pours out his heart in song for Saul and Jonathan. There's nothing negative about Saul in this song at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. He says they were mighty, beautiful. They were the beauty of Israel. There was a song started a while ago that caused Saul to start down a very dark road. It provoked his pride. Everyone heard about it. It was even repeated by the Philistines. Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s. We now have a different song written by David to remember Saul by. A song that wasn't just spread by word of mouth, but that David wanted the whole tribe of Judah to teach their children. He says, "How the mighty have fallen in the midst of the battle. Jonathan was slain in your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You have been very pleasant to me. Your love to me was wonderful, surpassing the love of women. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war perished." This last part is directed more towards Jonathan. See, David had a very special relationship with Jonathan, one he didn't find in any other man or any other woman. Jonathan was a godly man. He trusted in the Lord to give the victory. Jonathan, I believe, was that godly brother that you could lean on, like iron sharpening iron. During the life of David, I haven't seen another man who was truly godly like Jonathan. Yes, you could say Samuel was there, right? He was a godly man, but he didn't have a relationship with David like Jonathan did. Not even his wives. I have a special relationship with my wife, and David had multiple wives, but he didn't find a godly counselor in his wives like he did with Jonathan. Even among his troops, there was not a person who was the encourager. I think Jonathan would have made a great king, but God set up David to be the next king, and Jonathan was okay with that. So this relationship that David has with Jonathan is truly a special one. Now, some people have suggested that this statement means that David had a homosexual relationship with Jonathan. That is the farthest thing from the truth. And it would be a huge insult to the character of David and to the character of Jonathan. These are men who truly desired to put God first. They would step into battle, trusting God to lead. Even Jonathan, with just his armor bearer, took on a bunch of men, climbed up that mountain, if you remember. I have a very special relationship with many of my brothers and sisters in this church, and they have been an encouragement to me. And at times, they are closer than a brother. They have been like a parent or a grandparent. I've confided in them, and they have been that godly counselor, like Jonathan was to David. I would not be doing this that I do if it weren't for the encouragement from my brothers and sisters. I could say, like David, their love for me was wonderful. And if you're wondering if David was truly able to forgive Saul and love him, I would say he did. He didn't keep a record of wrongs, and he overlooked the sin of this man Saul. Only the positive things are pointed out in David's song. And even though David now has the king's own bracelet and the king's own crown, we don't read of David putting them on and asserting his authority over all Israel. He is truly letting God lead. And one of the things you could say that you see in this song and you see in David that would make him a man after God's own heart is that he was truly able to forgive and to let it go. And isn't that what we all want? Because if there is hope for us, if sin leads to death and Jesus Christ has provided that way out, then he has to forgive us. And it says that he has. He's removed those sins from us as far as the east is from the west. And not only has he given us eternal life, but he's given us a relationship with him. One that comes with an inheritance. One that comes with the Father that loves us more than anything. So, let's pray, guys. Father, thank you for the man that we see here in 2 Samuel chapter 1. The man who would be willing to forgive and forget. The man who would write such a beautiful song about the one who has been chasing him for so long. Lord, that he would truly put you first, Father. Help us to be like David. Help us to be like those positive things that David did, Lord. Help us to be willing to forgive and to forget, to move past, to extend that grace and mercy to our brothers and sisters, Lord. Help us, Lord, to be able to reach out to you, Lord, in those times where we're struggling, Father. So, Lord, we thank you for tonight, Lord. We pray, Lord, that if there is someone who is listening to this message online, Lord, that they would seek out Jesus Christ, that they would look for him, that they would give their lives to Jesus Christ, knowing that he died for their sins, and that all they have to do is ask him to come into their lives, Lord. We pray, Father, that those people who are on the fence would make that decision for you today, Lord. And Father, for us, continue to grow us to be more like you, Lord, because we still are so full of flaws, Lord. And Lord, we thank you for tonight. We thank you for your message. Just cause it to continue to go around and around. Help us to meditate on it, Father. In Jesus' name, amen.